Okay, we are jumping into the heart of the civilian pay analysis tool, version 1.0. Remember to check that you have the most current version out on the SharePoint. This is what we'll be teaching in the December training class at Joint Base San Antonio. So, this is current for my unit's data, so we have pay period information for the first three. And actually, if we look, it's the 27th, so one other pay period is in it. We just don't have the data in here. The data is not available yet. So we'll see some things in here about that. What you want to key on first is entering in information that is relevant to the current fiscal year. So this may look orange to you on the video screen. It's yellow in the template. And anything in this entire template that's yellow are things where you're going to enter data. So initial data to be entered, if I can scroll in here. So this one on the left, initial data to be entered, and then blue is automatically calculated. So please pay attention to that. If it's yellow, it may be absolutely critical to the template working properly, or it may be an optional thing, and we'll go through that in the videos as well, if it's optional or not. So let's just get started. MRV, if you're going to start your civ pay analysis, you got to start with authorizations, or what you're authorized to spend, who you're authorized to hire. Your manpower resource voucher, your MRV information, if you're new, make sure you get that perhaps from your comptroller or somebody in the FM office, or from FSS. They're the holders of that. So I'm going to look on that MRV, and it's going to tell me how many permanent positions I'm funded to hire. So 258 is what it is for me. It's also going to tell you in the MRV NGB temps. Now these are NGB's giving you money specifically for a temp resource. So fire would be an example for the Financial Improvement and Audit Readiness Officer. It'll say that, and it'll give you the ESP code associated with that employee. So you'd plug that number right into there. We have two. I believe the other one's Security Forces. And then bulk temps. It'll say bulk on there. It'll be just an amount that they're funding you at as well. So for us it's 0. Others have 1520. So you'll just put that in there. And then funding. If there's a VTC from NGB, or they send an email out, they're going to say, of your total MRV, we're going to fund you at 100% of that. Or in the past it's been 98% of that. So this is an adjustable field. If it does change, just please change that, so that you may have that on your MRV, but if NGB says we're going to fund you at less for certain reasons, be aware that that's there. So at the end of the day, it says total MRV, total work years funded. You see it does a calculation based upon these cells, and that'll tell you how many work years you can execute. Moving down, and again a blue cell, so it does it for you. Work year information. So how many hours are in a work year? And there's a note in here that talks about that. So this will either be 2080, 2088, or 2096. Now OMB Circular A11 is the source document that gets published, and I believe they publish 3 years out. So this year and the next 3, if you were to Google OMB A11, and then the NGB guidance gets updated as well. It'll reflect that in the civ pay section, but you want to make sure that you update that. Last year it was 2096 with a leap year, and when you go out an entire year putting in 2096 or 2080, it makes a difference. It makes a big difference. And if you remember this in the pay hour codes tab, this table right here, this 2080, this is exactly the calculation we pulled out and put that table in there for you, so that this 2080 or 20, that was hard coded in the pivot table, so we took that out, put it in a table for you. Moving on with work year information. First pay period ended. Now if you are not like me, where you didn't have somebody work on Sunday the 1st of October, it would be 15 October. Now if we think about it, and there's no way to account for every single situation that happens, in my case what I did is made a note of it and changed my CRIS query, and I know that there are going to be 12 hours that aren't in my data. I can account for that. First pay period ending 15 October, and the last day of the fiscal year is 30 September 17, so make sure you look at the actual year here and just update that properly. Hours in the first pay period and last pay period, kind of unique this year that it's 80 and 80. A lot of times it's fractional. Total pay periods in the fiscal year, exactly 26. Again, fairly unique. Pay periods complete, 3. Well, that makes sense. I just showed you we have 3 pay periods in the data. Current pay period work year factor. Now, what this is it's putting it out here on the front page so we can use it for calculations. But if I were in the very first pay period and I got hired, so I started working in this year in 2 October, the Monday, the first day of the new pay period, and worked the entire year, that pay period work year factor would be the number 1. However, if I were hired into this pay period, so keep this in mind, 0.846. If I go to my projection assumptions, we'll spend a lot more time here, but let's find 0.846 right here. So what this is saying is that if I were hired in the next available pay period, and the reason why this is this pay period is because in reality it's the 27th, so the data is coming, it just hasn't come yet, so I can't get hired in this pay period. It knows that. But 0.846, if I'm hired in the next available pay period and then work the remainder of the year, that is the factor of a work year that I would execute. Other things, so current fiscal year total annual authority, that's this number here. We get incrementally funded, whether it's during CR or it's just that we have those quarterly authority amounts, not only we but NGB as well, so they can't send us our total Civ Pay budget. So right now that's what's sent. Just enter what's on that funding document, whether it's CR or whether it's your actual authority that they've given, and they'll do a budget execution review, send more funds. Prior year gross civilian pay, so this is in here specifically for unfundeds, UFERs, and awards limitations. Now there's some ongoing things right now about awards limitations and what we can pay for certain things, but at current, and things may change, we have a new administration coming in, but at current we're limited to 1% of our prior fiscal year gross obligations for Civ Pay for UFERs, and then we have an awards limitation within that that's based on some guidance from, I believe, 2010, so 0.96% of this 1%. So that's in there. It's used in the calculations. It may change moving forward, and if it does, we'll make sure we update these tools so that it's representative. Non-R60 expense. This is something that for example, the most common one would be a PCS. Let's say we're going to approve and pay for a PCS for a civilian employee to come and be our maintenance group commander. That means we're going to need to set aside money for that PCS, household goods shipments and everything else. We're going to make the EECs, put them in there so they hit in BQ or DEEMS, but that is not going to show up in our R60. It's not a Bork year type of thing. It's not going into ATAPs, right? So we need to account for that money because it is that non-R60 PCS is still paid out of our generated laps. It's a dollar amount. So once you get here, if there is an expense and you know it's going to cost 20 grand, just go ahead and put $20,000 right in here and it will update the tool. So projection assumptions now, 99.9% of you, if you're going to be using this projection assumptions tab, which you should, you're going to leave this at 1. You're going to look back to the most current pay period that's in the data and then extrapolate from there. You're going to project from there based upon inputs. It does give you the ability to go back 1 pay period, 2 pay periods, or how many ever pay periods you like to, depending on trends and if you don't expect there to be any type of fluctuations, it might be a legitimate way to just say, I want to take the last 3 pay periods, and then it'll tell you what that pay period ended was, and that's what it'll use. But we want to stick with 1, and I'll show you why in the next video, because it's going to be the basis for us doing hiring plans, LWOP plans, or things like that. So it's very important to keep it at 1 unless you're really familiar or comfortable, because this is what it's the basis of extrapolating for the year and making this a powerful decision support tool. The rest of this we'll get into a little bit later. And I'll just kind of go over the Excel parts of this. So come up here, update this, whatever your wing name is, 126th Air Refueling Wing, 115th Fighter Wing, 169th Fighter Wing, whatever it is. This is a this is a pivot table all the way up till here and down. So that's going to fill in over the year. You don't want to come in here necessarily and adjust things. It will fill in as the data come in. You don't need to filter anything. It's going to show you how many hours are worked, the adjusted work year cost, because it takes out LSL and awards, and it's going to show you your LSL. It's going to show you your awards by pay period work year cost, so that's the average cost per person in that pay period, and we do use that for a proxy for work years. So if you were to say how much is a work year worth in dollars, that's how much it's worth in dollars if you take the average or just the last one, but that's what we look at. 89,429 is currently one pay period worth of dollars for this wing. Work years executed, that's part of the pivot table. And then we move on to these here. Now, it is possible to go into the raw data and make a bunch of calculations to pull these into the pivot table, but the thing is that it takes up a lot of calculation speed, or it's very expensive to put those calculations in. So what we do is just do one calculation per cell in here. It makes it so that it's not a slow tool, but it still reflects properly. So the execution, the delta between these work years and members that we pull in, these will expand as the pivot table expands, and that's what these formulas in here are there to do. If it's nothing to the left, show nothing. If not, then do that work year delta calculation, and so on. Then down to the bottom here, we're going to be looking at our work year consumption factors. So MRV funded, we looked at that before, 260, right? Minus NGB ESP funded employees. The reason why we put this in here is because they're giving you money for a specific type of employee, and for that employee to be working in a specific area. So you want to be at least cognizant of the fact that we've got 260 total authorizations, but if you're not going to be utilizing them at all, the NGB funded ones, if you're just not using them, they're going to want to pull them back, or they don't want you using or executing work years against something else just because you have a couple extra. So just to be aware, that's there. That's how many non-NGB funded work years you have. And then hours per work year is 2080. We saw that already. Projected work year consumption. What this is going to do is take a look at what has happened. So it's going to take a look at how many have executed, and then it's going to extrapolate just a flat. Okay, we've got 29.19 work years executed now, and then it's going to take this 9.73 work years. Based upon this, right, this is what we're setting it as the most current one, and then add that for as many pay periods as are remaining. So that's where that number comes from. We made a note in there. Then we have this here, and we're going to spend a whole video talking about this, but these are the things that are coming in the future. So hiring permanent employees, people retiring or moving, temp employee hires, temp employee removal, LWOP for people that are going to be gone for a certain amount of time, bringing them back from LWOP. And then there are certain specific pay period adjustments that may not have an effect on future pay periods, but they do affect that one particular pay period. So that's the culmination of all that stuff we'll talk about. So simple addition, so 253 is projected from what we've seen, plus these other things that aren't in the R60 data, means 263.19. The non-pay hour expenses, Civ PCS, that's going to pull from that non-R60 expense here, network your costs, it's going to convert it into, okay, that's money, so how many work years does that mean? We move down to the U first, the LSL and awards. So brings in those figures for your prior year. Okay, so what's my 1% cap? We have the ability to put in a projected amount for awards. So if we know we're going to spend $75,000 and no more on awards, we'll put that in projections. Once it happens, once it actually comes to fruition and it's in the data in the awards column, then we take that out because it will be shown here. We don't want to double count. All that is shown in a work year factor as well. And so you can see 227,445 is the UFR cap, but then there's an awards cap underneath that as well because it's not the full amount. And then as they execute, it'll tell you how many work years we have remaining, and then that will be put into your total fiscal year work year consumption projection is what that is, and then an execution amount. The way I have it set up now with the projection assumptions, it's over 100%. So that's it for this video. We're going to pick right back up where we left off. I'll see you then.